Hey everyone, today we will be presenting our behavior change study replication project. My name is Alyssa Buford and I will be presenting the limitations portion later in the slides. Ashley No and Alexandra Brine will be presenting the overview of the study we chose to replicate and the literature review. Kara Gogolu will be going over the study procedures. Mindy Fairchild will be presenting data, findings, inter-observer agreement information. And then Alexandra Brine will be going over the conclusion and final thoughts on the project.
Before I get started with the literature review, I'm going to be manning the presentation. So as the slides are going, it's going to be taking over my picture. So I'm still here, but you're going to see our presentation instead of my face. Here we go. So for our literature review, Alex and I are going to go over the original study, 2 articles featuring similar methods for changing behavior, and 2 articles feature similar behavior changes. So our original study was using goal settings and feedback to increase weekly running distance. The hypothesis was that increasing individual running frequency and duration would come through goal setting using both short-term and long-term goals. The participants in the study were 5 female college students, ages 18 to 28. All of them were considered to be healthy and able to participate in the study. They used a distance tracker, the Nike Sport Kit. The procedure was a multiple baseline. All participants wore the tracker during the baseline, but they didn't set their short-term or long-term goals. They just ran. During intervention 1, all the participants picked their short-term goal and their long-term goal. Their long-term goal was the distance that they aimed to run in one single running episode. Their short-term goals changed at every weekly meeting. All the participants met weekly with their instructor and with the group to set their goals and report on their progress. They had to meet their target goal for their short-term goal for 2 consecutive runs in order to move up the following week. Because 3 of the participants failed intervention 1, they created intervention 2, which meant that there was no longer a minimum number of runs that were required per week. Instead, there was a distance that had to be at or above the criterion for 2 or more weeks before they could set a new goal. The goals that used to be weekly, or that used to be daily, are now weekly goals. And the participants, all the 3 of them, were given the option to stay in intervention 1 or move to intervention 2, but they all chose to move to intervention 2 because it was a bit easier. And the results were that all 5 participants increased their running distance using the goal setting and performance feedback. The discussion is that the sample size is very small, and they had difficulty with some of the feedback because of that. So another study that I found that is a similar method of changing behavior was promoting teachers' generalization of intervention through goal setting and performance feedback. For this, the study took 3 teachers, 2 general education teachers, and 1 Head Start teacher who had students who had disruptive behaviors in their classroom. And they had a AB multiple baseline study. During a baseline, the teachers were watched as they spoke to both their target students, which were their behavior students, and their non-target students, to see what the way that they spoke to them, their specific labeled praise is particularly what they were looking for. And then during their goal setting and feedback time, they were taught how to generalize their praise across both the target and non-target students. And then the feedback was withdrawn and then reintroduced again during the final phase. Some of the flaws for this study were that the sample size was very small and the second and third participants started simultaneously for this multiple baseline study, and that there's only one other study that tests for generalization with teachers. So future studies should increase the sample size to better show a functional relationship between the goal settings and feedback and teachers' performance with generalization. The last study that shows goal setting and feedback is using performance feedback and goal setting to improve elementary students' writing fluency. It was a randomized control study that took place with 115 third grade students. They used 3 different groups. One was performance feedback and goal setting, and then another just received performance feedback, and the third was a control group. They measured the number of words written and the number of correct written sequences for each writing probe. The groups were given 220 different writing probes, and the results were that the students in both intervention groups improved their writing fluency. The students who received both interventions gained approximately 2 times as many correct writing sequences as those who were in the control group. However, there was not a significant difference between the groups who received 2 interventions and the group who received only 1 intervention. So further studies might want to look between performance feedback and goal setting and see which of the 2 is better method. And the findings show, however, that performance feedback and goal setting are both beneficial for improving writing fluency for children. And I'm going to hand it off to Alex so that she can tell you about the last 2 studies.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to be discussing preliminary efficiency of prize-based contingency management to increase activity levels in healthy adults. This was a intervention that was used to utilize the use of technology and reward to help promote physical activity. The participants were 10 women and 5 men, all within the ages of 18 to 26 years old. They were all college students attending North Carolina University of Wilmington, and they were notified of the study through flyers that were posted among the school. Participants wanting to be a part of the study could not be pregnant or have any pre-existing conditions that would prevent them from safely conducting this experiment. And also they had to have the desire to increase their overall physical activity. At the start of this intervention, all were at a healthy weight. To measure the, to help show that technology could improve physical activity, Fitbits were utilized for each participant. And they were also given an Excel spreadsheet that was shared on a Google Doc. Each participant was asked to write down how many steps they had taken that day. The procedure was an ABA reversal design, and they also used prizes and social praise to help promote increase in physical activity. During the design, the participants did a baseline, treatment, and then baseline. During treatment, the participants were asked to come into the lab 3 times per week to charge their Fitbits and to also ensure that the researchers could ensure that the data being presented by these participants was accurate. The results showed that only 10 of the participants out of the 15 ended up completing the experiment. Most were not able to finish because of losing the Fitbit, or they had sustained injury while trying to increase their physical activity. 4 participants did increase their baseline by 2 miles. 4 other participants increased baseline by 1 mile, and the remaining 2 had no noticeable difference from baseline to intervention. Flaws with this study were that the baseline and intervention were far too short to show relevance between using a Fitbit and an increase in physical activity. The sample size was also too small to show a change, seeing as only 53% of the participants had increase in physical activity. Future studies should increase the sample size and the duration of the study to show a functional relationship that wearing a fitness tracker could increase physical activity. And next, I will be discussing with you the goal setting and group performance in physical activity contexts. Burke and colleagues highlighted the advantages of group goal setting, particularly on influencing the increase of walking in their study. In our study, we discussed the efficiency of increasing running, whereas in this study, they discuss increase in walking through goal setting. So there were 6,356 participants that were broken into 1,325 groups of 3 to 6 individuals. The participants were asked to join a Walk for Kansas program that helped to increase physical activity amongst the citizens of Kansas. So approximately 81.6% of the participants mentioned previously were female. However, not all subjects wanted to divulge that information. For the procedure, each group, once they were together, selected a goal that they wanted to meet over the 8 weeks. Each individual specified whether they had low physical activity, moderate physical activity, or above average physical activity prior to the intervention. These individuals were then placed into groups that matched other individuals with the fitness level. As I stated, this procedure lasted for 8 weeks. The results were that every group, regardless of low physical activity, moderate, or high physical activity, all showed a general increase in their physical activity through the use of goal setting. However, the researchers used statistical analysis to show that the increased over the 8-week program, which was very hard to read and understand as to how they utilized the group goal setting. Inter-observer agreement was not specified, whereas the participants wrote down how much they walked per week and then reported to a team captain. That information could have easily been forged to show an increase as an overall group. The flaw with this study would be, as I just mentioned, the data was not very reliable, but the sample size was very large and helped to show that goal setting could assist in increasing a person's physical activity. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kara.
Hey, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our study specifically. So our hypothesis was that goal setting will increase an individual's running frequency and duration. So our behavioral definition, we defined increased running as running continuously at a speed faster than a brisk walk at 4 miles per hour for a set distance or further for 3 consecutive runs. So a quick example, we used Alexandria, has set a goal of running 3/4 of a mile and ran 0.76, 0.75, and 0.77. Therefore, she was able to move on to her next goal that she set of 0.85. A non-example of this would be that she ran for 10 minutes across 3 runs, approximating each run was over 0.75 miles. So how we collected our data, we used the Runtastic app to show how far each of us ran. Each of us was responsible for keeping track of our own progress and reporting it every week at our meetings. And then we all met on a weekly basis to check in and discuss what our current goals were and the progress towards our ultimate long-term goal. And our goal setting, which was a big part of this, each of us set a long-term goal and short-term goals along the way. Just like I discussed previously, we had to get 3 consecutive runs that were over our short-term goal in order to make an additional one. Once our short-term goal was met, individually we set a new goal for ourselves to hopefully meet our long-term goal. And moving to a new targeted distance was contingent on the individual having met the set distance across 3 consecutive runs. And now I'm going to pass it off to Mindy, who's going to talk about our data.
All right, thank you very much. I am going to talk about our group's study data that we collected during the replication of this study. So as a quick overview, just a reminder of what we were trying to replicate. There were 5 of us in our group, and the study was actually on five girls. So that worked out really well. We each set individual goals for ourselves. So it wasn't contingent on what the group was setting, but what we individually were setting. This study in particular was a multiple baseline design, but within that multiple baseline design, it was a changing criterion design since we were setting our own individual goals. So we had both of them going on at the same time. So I'm going to talk about our group data it's kind of small because we have all 5 of us in this, but I wanted you to see how they both worked together before I showed you the graphs. So you'll see that the ones highlighted in orange are where the baseline actually stair steps down. Since it's a multiple baseline design, we couldn't start at the same time the intervention. So the first person was myself. So after 5 data points of baseline, then I started intervention. Well, five data points and then intervention. And then Ashley did 6 data points and then she went to intervention. And Alexandria 7, Alyssa 8, and Kara at 9. So we couldn't start at the same time. We had to start after each other. So that's what the orange indicates, is when the baseline was set. After that, all the ones that are marked in blue are when we met our short-term goal. That criterion was met. After 3 runs of hitting the short-term goal that we set for ourselves, we were able to set our new goal at a higher distance. So if you look at the middle person, Alexandria's, she has her very first blue was met from her baseline that she had set. She set a new goal of 1 mile, and then she has 3 data points after that. She got above, either she hit 1 mile or she went above 1 mile, and then she got to set her next goal for 1.1. So that's why the blue is at different not tier or stair step down, because those aren't multiple baseline. Those are the criterion that they set individually, but then the orange is the baseline for the multiple baseline. So we'll move on to the next slide. And the next 5 slides are just our individual data between like the chart for us and then the visual representation of the graph. I'm not going to go through each individual point, but I want to draw your attention to, on these graphs, I also added an average of our baseline data so that you can see where our very first goal was set, why it was above that baseline data. So on mine, after my 5 data points for baseline, I have an average of just below 1 mile. So after looking at that, I set my very first goal at 1.25. And you'll see through all of our data, or as far as our individual goals, they vary. I went up in like just 1/4 mile each time, but then other people in these next few graphs, some have a huge jump, some then smaller jumps, or smaller jumps and then larger ones. So Alexandria, go one more back. Ashley was the second person. Her average, the line that's actually parallel to the x-axis, is the average for her baseline data. It's just below 0.5. So her very first goal that she set was at 0.5. And then it gradually, she had a small jump after, and then a larger jump and a larger jump. So maybe she got more confident in her goals after that. And she actually stayed true to her 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 to actually hit those goals that she was setting. And the next person, Alexandria, her average was around 0.55. And so she had a huge jump and a huge jump. And then maybe she felt like she couldn't get much far after that. Maybe she was getting tired. I'm not sure. But this just shows how that we individualized our own goals. We knew what we wanted to get done, and our ultimate goal, the final at the very end of our study, was what we were trying to get to, that long-term goal. So maybe she was getting close to that long-term goal, so maybe they got smaller, but that was hers. The very next one is Alyssa's. And her baseline is very, very tried and true at the very beginning. And so her average is very close to the data points in her baseline. Her average was, I think it was 1.79 where that one was. And then her very first goal that she set was 1 mile. And then the last one is Kara's data. And her baseline was right around her baseline was very similar to Alyssa's as far as her first 5 runs were very consistent. So I think it was a little maybe easier for her to figure out where she wanted her first goal to be. But then she had a huge jump after that from 1.1 to 1.5. And so that's all of our data as far as visual and graphs go. The very next slide, it will show you all the multiple baselines together. It's all 5 of our graphs in one. They were too long to actually have in a column, so they're split 3 and then 2, but that's all 5 of our information in one. But you can see the dotted line that goes through to show the multiple baseline, as well as the dotted lines that are parallel for the changing criterion within the multiple baseline. The very next slide, we're moving away from the graphs and we're going into the IOA data. We actually had to meet with the professor to figure out how we could do the IOA data. We bounced around ideas on how we could do this, since we can't be in the location to watch the other person run, and we tried to figure out technology to make it work, and at the end of the day it just wasn't possible. And so the professor actually gave us the clear to not to collect IOA data because the integrity would be too compromised and it wouldn't be accurate. So due to extenuating circumstances, our group was unable to accurately collect the IOA data for this project. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is the treatment fidelity table. The whole point of this study was to actually see if goal setting actually affects the distance that we ran. Did it actually motivate us to actually get to those goals? And so with that, this table shows that we met weekly, once a week, to see if we were each running, if we were meeting our goals, and kind of encouraging and giving feedback for us to hit those goals. So all of us, we had 6 meetings that were specific for our running goals, and all 6 of us came to all 6 of those meetings. So that was great that we actually attended those. But then on top of that, we had our set goals to find out if we met, but then if we met those goals, did we create new goals that were getting us to our final end goal? And you'll see that the numbers actually are different. Like you'll see, like on my first one, I have 5 of 5, Ashley has 4 of 5. That's not that she didn't hit her 5, it's just since we had the multiple baseline, I might have had more runs available than she did. Same with Alexandria and Kara. Alexandria had more runs available to hit those goals, whereas Kara was the last one to start, so she had the least amount of runs available in the intervention. So I had 15 runs available. I made 5 goals. 5 times 3 is 15, so I was able to hit that 5th goal, whereas Ashley had 1 less. She only had 14. So if we had 21 runs, she might have gotten 5 of 5 at that point, or she would have had 6 of 5. But so all of us did really well with the goals that we set. We met most, if not all, of those goals. So through this whole study, I think we did a really good job of proving that you set a goal and you're much more motivated to meet it, along with the group giving you feedback and encouragement and keeping you accountable. And with that, I've done with mine, and so I'm going to pass it on to the limitations of this study.
All right, everybody, I'm going to talk about some of the limitations that we had during the study. Due to limited time in the semester, we had to minimize the data collection period. Data could have been taken for a longer period of time. We may have been able to see more of the long-term effects of the short-term goal setting. This could give more information on how the goal setting method is affected when a plateau period comes into play, which is a pretty big part of the with goal setting. When you hit a part where you get stuck, sometimes it can be hard to push past that. While the short-term goal setting approach was proven significant in increasing distance ran over time, it does not provide much information on sticking with the intervention long-term. The short-term goals are very motivational, but it would be interesting to see how the short-term goals affect long-term behavior change. And due to the time constraints in the multiple baseline method, participants who began the treatment phase later in the study did not have as much opportunity for feedback and experience as Mindy previously mentioned. So those individuals' data did not necessarily represent all of the goals that they set, and it probably would have looked more successful. Another significant limitation to this study, also previously mentioned by Mindy, was that we were unable to collect inter-observer agreement information. We had individuals or participants in all in like 5 different states, and with weather conditions, it made it difficult to decide between running outside and other aspects to be able to do the inter-observer agreement. Yeah, but with all of the limitations, the study was also very successful, and we were able to replicate the fact that short-term goal setting is motivational in meeting long-term goals. And I am going to pass it on to Alexandra to talk a little bit more about the conclusion and final thoughts.
Thank you, Alyssa. So in conclusion, we all took baseline data to determine a short-term goal and then a long-term goal over the course of our experimentation. Short-term goals were based off of our baseline data and then worked up to that long-term goal. Working together as a group definitely helped us in reaching these long-term goals, as we had each other to discuss with the challenges and the triumphs of reaching short-term and long-term goals. All 5 of us met weekly to discuss our goals and how we could reach the short-term and the long-term. We all managed to meet our short-term and long-term. Having weather conditions and different schedules definitely made this experimentation difficult to replicate, but we all managed to find ways in order to do it. And as I said, having all of us together definitely kept us motivated across the short time that we had to make this project possible. And on behalf of Alyssa, Ashley, Kara, Mindy, and myself, we'd like to thank you for watching this presentation and listening to how we were able to replicate our project.